welcome to Central Florida Salute YouTube. Once again, coming to you from Orlando, Florida at the Vietnam Veterans of America Convention. And I have the Sergeant at Arms here, Grant Coates. Hi, brother.
Hello.
We just met, so you're going to have to help me out of here a little bit. Where are you from?
Upstate New York, near Cooperstown.
Oh, okay. And you were in the Vietnam, and tell us a little about yourself. When you what branch of service are you in? Army? Army? You enlisted?
I volunteered.
Okay.
I went to a military high school and learned a lot of history, responsibilities, some of the military tactics, training, and then went to college, and it was 1968, and things didn't blend between the military and civilian aspects, so I figured I had a responsibility to this country, so I volunteered. Went into service in April, and in September went to Vietnam.
Okay, so you went in and you went to basic, boot camp, whatever.
Went to basic at Fort Dix, went to advanced training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and, Vietnam. Came back in 1969, was stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland, riot duty for Washington, D.C. Took part in the military maneuvers in Washington for the November moratorium. Got out in April, went through 5 jobs, went back into the service, and was a weapons instructor at Fort Dix, and then went to Germany where I was in an MB battalion.
Wow, so how many years did you wind up doing?
6.5.
6.5? So you were in Vietnam as infantry?
I was in infantry. I volunteered for a program that dealt with Labrador retrievers and a 5-man team. Our mission was reestablishing contact with the enemy. The concept came about from, at that time it was General Westmoreland. He had been advised that the British Army had just finished a 10-year war in Malaysia, and one of their Special Air Service officers who was in charge of the troops that were there realized that guerrilla warfare had changed from World War II to the communist insurgency in Malaysia. And so he came up with a concept of we cannot be ambushed all the time and let the enemy have the advantage of surprise. We need to develop a program where we take the fight to their house. And so originally there was a combination of their SAS units, and they had later on, they had units, members from their Gurkha battalion not infiltrated, but assigned there. And what it was 2 Labrador retrievers and a 10-man team, and all of them were cross-trained in specific areas of tactical maneuvering. And they went through programs where they learned ground tracking and using the dogs to track the scent of the enemy and basically keep the enemy moving, not being able to establish a camp.
Yeah.
So when our officers had gone there and evaluated the school that had been set up in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, at that time, the British Jungle Warfare School was comprised of SAS officers from New Zealand, soldiers from New Zealand, the 26th Australian Veterinary Corps, and a contingent of Gurkhas that were had already been trained in the tactics of the trackers, and they would be track layers and play the role of the enemy for training. So the U.S. started using the school for training, but because at that time Britain was not part of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, They were not actively involved in the Vietnam conflict. So this, at that time in 1967, when it started, was a covert training mission where U.S. personnel would go there on a civilian passport, no military gear, nothing associated with the U.S. They go train there using British equipment and then come back and be reestablished as a tracker team. And originally there were 13 or 14 teams that were numbered 1 through 13 or 14. And originally they had, I don't know if it started out in the very beginning, but they redesignated some of the teams to unit numbers, not 1 through 14. And they would do 2 platoons per division, or 1 team to brigade, a team consisting of 5. So the concept was developed, and as the original teams had combat experience, because everybody didn't come to the service at the same time, you had some people that were rotating out of theater, some that were getting out of the service, some were wounded, some were killed, and it created gaps within the teams. So additional schools were created, one in country in Benoit, and all of the dogs came underneath the control of USAREE, United States Army, Republic of Vietnam Dog Training Detachment. And kennels were set up and incoming reception areas for dogs to come in that had been trained in other areas regarding the shepherds. And they started a volunteer program for soldiers to be able to volunteer into the unit itself. And they would have to go through a basic dog obedience handler course. And at that time, they would be trained into some of the specifics for visual tracking, ground detection, as far as symbols, the tactics that the enemy would use for laying basically signals using vegetation or earth, dirt, sand, stones. And then they had identifying patterns for booby traps, go right, go left, this is the way. And then they realized that they were being tracked, and over time they would do secondary signals on the ground. And many of them were very subtle. The ones that were easier to see by eye, the visual tracker of the team would be the tracking element. And as it got harder to find and track, then the dog would be used. And usually the team was in advanced position from the support troops that had combat. So a lot of the times the teams would get trapped because they were forward and they had to wait for support to come up. But as time went on, tactics changed, and we had the observation helicopter and the gunships overhead as a hunter-killer team being eyes in the sky to help out. And there were various events that had occurred throughout Vietnam as far as reestablishing contact with the enemy. One of the other areas was to find lost personnel, U.S. or friendly forces. If they were told, well, here's the point of last seen, bring the dog in and try to find them. Because sometimes ground elements get separated during the heat of battle, or just if an aircraft goes down and there's survivors, they might have wandered away. So in 1969, when I was there, the highest number were 33 teams.
Wow. You know, I've never heard of this before. You know, I know that, you know, when you think of the dogs in the service, you think like the MPs, and, you know, they had them around the perimeters and stuff. But this tracking concept, this is new to me. This is interesting.
The dogs, with the exception of the Air Force, which had their own school, and the majority of the Air Force dogs were sentry dogs. They were the perimeter control,
Yeah.
the aircraft, that type of a scenario. I know the MPs had dogs, but there were scout dogs that would go out also, completely different tactic that the scout dog would use. scout dog and the handler might be assigned to a ground unit, and that dog is going to be picking up more sound, using its ears and eyes more than its nose. It uses its nose also, whereas a Labrador is going to be using its nose primarily, and then the ears and then the eyes. So a green dog that's just starting its training could very well bump into the person that they're tracking because they're so focused on the ground and the scent, versus the scout dog, which is looking out and smelling and hearing and listening for movement or seeing the movement. But there were also mine dogs. There were also tunnel dogs, different aspects. And as the war went on, because there was different, let's say, floating or changing conditions, a lot of the times there was basically experimenting. And my unit, we had a scout dog and a handler with our team. So now we had 6 and 2 dogs. And between the scout dog and the tracker dog, one being focused on the ground and the other being focused in the air, it was kind of like a full radar use of the dogs.
Yeah.
Their noses, their hearing, and their sight combined. The shepherd's going to be looking up, whereas the lab's going to be looking down. And yeah, it's completely different world.
Yeah, this is like something, makes a lot of sense what you're saying to me and everything, and but you never really heard about your units and what these dogs did and everything,
Well, one of the problems, to go by what you're talking about, never hearing about it, is this is a concept that came out of another country's war. This isn't something that historically got passed down. You had... When you had cannons, everybody had cannons, and it didn't matter during the chronological order from the beginning of the use of gunpowder and cannon. Mm-hmm. Everybody had it. Everybody knew about it. Everybody used it. When you start talking unique factors, everybody doesn't know it. Now you have, like during World War II, you had the SAS, Special Air Service. These were the commandos. Mm-hmm. They had a specific skill and a specific mission. Be inserted, move with stealth, complete the mission, and escape. As time went on, everybody heard about it, the enemy knew about it, they tried to do tactics against it. Just like the steel tank traps at Normandy. The Germans knew about it, they did it, that was something that everybody knew about. But your home country, the French resistance, completely different, no rules, no anything, just disrupt and slow down type of a thing. With the trackers, yes, dogs have been used throughout years. The Romans had dogs, but they didn't, it was more like using an elephant. An elephant creates fear in troop lines. But is an elephant practical as far as upkeep and stealth, and it only has a limited use. When the British started using the dogs in Malaysia, they had a specific targeted goal: find the enemy. And find the enemy and not get killed. And to do that, the trackers had to know what are the ground signals that the enemy is using. They don't put up signs with arrows like on a highway. Yeah. It might be a broken branch that looks like an animal broke it. Well, if you look at it, you can tell, was it cut? Was it bent on purpose? Was it bent because an animal went through and it just got repositioned? Or was a leaf broken? Were those stones? How many times you go out and you see stones, you see 5 stones piled up like a pyramid.
That's a marker.
Or you see 3 stones together and then a stone off the side, so if you look down at it, it might look like a constellation. No, those are ground markings, and that's indicative, and the word gets passed back. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to tell somebody else, hey, 3 stones means don't go any farther. Or 3 stones means you're on the right path. So all these little ground markings, it became known, the British trained it, now they created a school so that they're training other people so that when they go out and on the training mission, they know the enemy could have circled around and they're waiting to the side of your track. You better be paying attention and being able to look through the woods and be able to see things that are obvious. So with that training, it came back, and now the U.S. people are going into combat situations using that trained skill and being successful and training the OJT, the person that's being brought in, because now at a certain point, they need more people. The schools can't produce enough fast enough to keep those teams full. So now they have to establish more schools. So 2 schools were created in the States, and 1 was going on in country to try to fill in. And you needed volunteers. This isn't an assignment where you get there and you get told you're going to be doing this.
Yeah.
Because at that time it was the training was covert, but once the units were established in a division or a brigade, now the issue was training the officers to be how to use the dogs. We're not going to be used to sit someplace and guard someplace. We're not going to be used to send that dog out and see if it's booby trapped. That's not our mission. We're not going to stay out overnight to help that night ambush. That's not our mission. Our mission is to reestablish contact with the enemy. So certain units had aircraft on standby, helicopters. They had priority because most of the times it was insertion by helicopter. So a team gets notified by their tactical operations center. There's been contact. They're going to need a tracker team in the morning, or we need a tracker team now. Get to the helipad. There's a helicopter waiting. You get out there, and depending on the scenario that's going on, there might be helicopters circling in the area, and now all of a sudden they're on frequency, and they know that they're looking out for us. There are our air eyes to be able to assist us to reestablish contact with the enemy. Trying to teach the officers that have gone through an officer's school and been told how to do map reading and leadership, they don't understand that they have another tool, another facet to be able to use to complete their mission. And so a lot of the times there was misuse, and because of that, use of a dog detachment had it set up where most of the tracker teams could call in and go above the field officer's head, basically like a hotline, and say, we're being misused, or we have a problem here, we need to be extracted. And then the officer sometimes they're told, you caused the mess, you fix the mess, get that team out of there. Most of the time that didn't happen, but even the ground troops didn't understand that there was the availability of a tracker team. What do they do if they do have contact? They send somebody chasing them? Well, they just ruined the track. And if that person went and chased the enemy, he might disappear. He might be killed and become a prisoner. So trying to teach the officers, so we had regular classes for, not inductees, but the new arrival officers. This is what is available for us. We'd even give it to the troops. We pass out cards, what our mission is, and how do you use us. If you have contact with the enemy and the enemy retreats, do not chase the enemy. Stand fast, call in, request a team. When we get there, say that's the last place that I saw the enemy. We'll take over. Cast the dog out, the dog gets on track, get the team leader, the tracker, visual tracker and the dog. They evaluate whether or not the track is easy enough to be followed visually, or this is difficult, we send the dog. And both the dog handler and the visual tracker have a cover man, and that person is the buddy, he's right next to him. The old saying was, one gets shot, both get shot. And the cover man's responsibility is to be looking out in the distance. That's the future eyes, what's coming up versus looking down. I've got no business as a cover man looking at the ground. watching the dog handler or watching a visual tracker. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is looking out to see if I can see the enemy. If I see something that's very obvious, I might see a tripwire, I might see a booby trap, I might see the enemy, I might see an obstacle, whereas the others are looking down and they're following that track. So as a concept and cross-training, we were very successful. We had a high casualty rate. In February of '69, when I was wounded, during 2 weeks, 7 out of 10 of us were either wounded or killed.
Well, so
that
you,
reduced us down to
you
one
got, what, where did you get wounded? Did you get shot in the back?
No, we were, it was a booby trap.
Booby trap.
Booby trap that somebody, a new guy that moved forward when he shouldn't have, not realizing that he was going into an area.
A lack of experience.
Yeah. And that caused him to be wounded, me to be wounded, a third one to be wounded, and then I was taking somebody's place on that team that was on R&R, and he came back and took my place on my team, and he got killed and 2 got wounded on that team.
Oh, wow.
So it happens.
Yeah, I'll give you a lot of credit, my brother.
Yeah.
You
It's a
know?
mission first.
Yeah, so how long were you over there doing these missions? Up for a year? Or?
Yes.
Yeah? Wow. How many dogs are like in this program and handlers total?
Well, there at Benoit, the dog training detachment, there were about 50 dogs, and some of these dogs were too old to work anymore. Some were waiting for their stateside trained handlers to come over because those were all shepherds. And some of the dogs, like I said, were just too old to complete the mission anymore, but still healthy enough to be used as a training aid. So the volunteers that came in would reuse them. We would go through obedience courses and learn how to handle the care and maintenance of the dog. And so it was a hands-on learning first, and then going either to the team or going to Malaysia, because everybody has to know each other's job.
Yeah.
You know, if the team leader, not the team leader, but if the dog handler gets hurt where he can't handle the dog, somebody's got to be able to handle the dog so the team can get out, get extracted.
Right.
If the dog handler is hurt and can't go back out to the field, somebody's got to be able to handle that dog to be able to go out to the field. It's not like the sentry dogs where it's a longer transition and they're taught to be aggressive. Labradors are not aggressive dogs to begin with.
No, they're
They're
not.
tracking dogs, they're bird dogs.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to work with the labs as far as transitioning the handler than it is the shepherd, where it takes a little bit more time to do a transition between handlers, which is usually about 3 weeks. With the labs, it was a 3-week transition where the new guy would come in and observe for a week. Second week, both the dog handlers would handle the dog. Third week, the old dog handler would stand in the shadows and we'll let the new one go, and then off to the program.
Let me ask you a question. You know, I see sometimes on the news or something where the dog is reunited with the soldier when they come home. They bring them home. What happens to all these dogs?
In Vietnam, dogs were treated like burnt-out light bulbs. They were expendable. There was no program where the dog would come back to the States. There was a transition, use it until it can't be used, euthanize it. And the majority of the dogs, there was a handful of dogs that did come back. There were unique situations. Somebody knew how to do the paperwork shuffle to be able to get the dog to come back. A couple of there were pictures where a Marine was in a wheelchair at home and he had been reunited with his dog. His dog came back. We have stories of some officers did a paper shuffle and they had the dog come back. But the majority of dogs were either euthanized or just left there to the Vietnamese who didn't know how to, they didn't have a true concept of being able to handle it. And then there was a law passed because it's created quite an uproar. And there was a law passed, and I believe it was, I don't know for sure, it might have been around the Gulf War, where there was a law stating that the kennel master can determine whether or not the dog can be demilitarized and become a pet.
Yeah.
And then there was a transition period where dogs could be, prior handlers could apply for ownership of the dogs. And there were some instances where dogs were transitioned over to law enforcement. I did 8.5 years in law enforcement as a canine handler.
Oh, up in
And
New York?
during that time, I had 2 different dogs, and I based, I wrote up the policies for it, and I based the majority of that on the training that I had in service as a dog handler.
Oh, yeah.
And I had one dog that was good with cadavers and explosives, and the other one in narcotics. So,
Wow.
but like I said, now it's a lot easier, and the programs are in place, so it doesn't matter if the dog is coming out of the combat zone or has been trained stateside. There is an ownership transition program now available.
I met this lady, and she's very much into service dogs, dogs that were in the service. Now, you're not like,
Right.
right, you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
what you're talking about. And she's trying to put a monument in, but she has to wait so many years before they're allowed to do it. She wanted to put it in National Cemetery up in Bushnell, and they told her no.
There's a process. It's a paper choke, but there is a process for you doing that. Nationwide, there are more monuments that have already been put in place in different states, whether it's a park or a town square, private property, with plaques dedicating to the dogs. Fort Benning has a monument area that has a flagpole in the middle, and there are 3 different monuments just for trackers. One's for the handlers, one's for the dogs, and one's for the teams. And it names all of the trackers that have been killed and all the dogs that have been killed, and dogs that have been service, team numbers. And there are a lot more civilians now that are doing it. They're dedicating some of them to their tracker monuments out. And one in Utah, one in Michigan. There's been a couple of others that are in planning or have been done. Local funds, or I don't know how they do it.
Yeah. I did a show with pigeons in World War II. A guy, a handler with pigeons, and there's awards for like pigeons and dogs and horses and all that. Medals they give out, which. But the dogs are fantastic. What you did was fantastic. One quick question, because I think I'm running out of time. I got a signal that we need to go, but I'm very interested. You got me going here, brother. Sergeant at Arms. What do you do as a sergeant at arms? Whatever they tell you to do?
Basically, I answer to the president at meetings. It's my responsibility to keep order. There's a saying, we're going to take a break, be back in 10 minutes, but the VVA's clock is they'll show up 25 minutes later. No, round them up, tell them to get back. The quicker they get back from a break, the quicker the meeting is over. I assist in distribution of any paperwork that has to go to the board of directors. The note passing comes to me. If somebody needs a message given to somebody else, they give it to me. Basically, keep the peace, keep in order. If the meeting is orderly, it'll be done quicker. Not that you want to end it quick, but there are certain functions that have to be performed. There's certain reports that have to be given. Yeah. And the phone calls going off or the sidebar talking, no, that's not tolerated. And I have to convince them not to be.
Oh, with your charm, I'm sure there's not a problem, brother.
No, everybody's good. Sometimes they just get off in their own mindset as far as I've got to talk to somebody or something.
Yeah. But you're for the BVA National.
Yes.
Do you go to other, obviously you're from New York, you said, and you're here. Now, if there's another meeting, say in California or something, would you wind up going there?
Only if it's at the national level. I'm the vice president for New York State, and our New York State Council, we have a sergeant at arms. It's not me. I have a responsibility as the vice president. That's been given to me by my president. So I handle certain contracts and meetings and things like that. And being at the national level and at the state level, I'm the chair of the PLW committee. So I have certain responsibilities as a chair. At the national level, I'm also the chair of the PLWMIA committee. So I have reports that I have to give when we have what we call tiers, which is certain time frames, and there's certain committees that meet during those time frames, so people can go to all of them. You can't have 15 or 12 committees all meet at once.
Yeah, right.
How do you can't
How
get
do you
around.
shuffle that? Yeah.
So by tiering it, once the general session is done, now the responsibilities shift over to attending these meetings. If you have some input, you have questions, you want to learn, or you're on that chapter committee or committee chair, I'm winding up. If you're on the committee, you have to be there, be involved. So once the meeting goes into recess to the tiers, then I shift over. But as a sergeant at arms, I try to keep my eye on everybody. Not that we have troublemakers, but some people might have a question. Where do I go to do this?
Yeah, right.
I need help doing this. Did you find my keys? I lost my cell phone. Any general question. If I can help and it helps them, then it relieves somebody else on the staff from having to do that job. So anything that comes down the road, whether somebody falls down, I help them. Somebody needs an ambulance. Somebody lost their pen. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
It's just to keep order, do as directed by the president. And by doing this, I've been doing this since '95. I know that a meeting, what goes where, who sits where, the name tag goes here. Somebody comes up and says, I've got a paper, I've got copies that everybody has to get. I'm the one that can float around and walk within the table setup of the board of directors. Other people have to go to a microphone, be recognized to be able to talk. Where I have the fluidity of being able to go over, somebody gives me a signal, and I know they need to pass it. Instead of saying, hey, George, what are we doing over here? If he's got a message for that person, I can catch that body language, walk over, get it, and then take it to the person, just to speed things up so people aren't getting up and disrupting. And then we have I don't want to say it's a game. There's a $5 fine if your phone goes off.
I've been in a lot of those meetings.
Well, a lot of people get very upset about that. And then I go, and afterwards I'll tell them, or they say, I'm not going to pay it. I said, oh, yes, you are. And I'll go over and say, do you know what this money goes for? It's not a punishment. This money goes for sympathy cards, get well cards, maybe flowers at a funeral for somebody. That's where it goes. We're trying to keep the meeting focused. And when your phone goes off and it's playing the Marine Corps hymn, right, or Barney Miller or something like that, you're disrupting, and whoever was talking might break their rhythm of their presentation. Yeah. And I don't think I can recall anybody saying, oh, well, I'm still not going to pay.
Yeah,
say,
no.
Okay, I understand.
That'd be a low life there.
Well.
Hey, Grant, I hate to cut you off, but, I got the signal that we have to get out of here because we came down and we got an hour's ride to get back.
Good.
And I'm so glad I had the chance to talk to you. I learned something here, and I want to thank you for your service, brother. And
one thing to add to this is if you want to learn more about the combat trackers, we have a website. It's combattrackers.org. And
that's good to know.
And there's a book that's called Seek On. And it was written by the wife of a team leader that had gone to the school in Malaysia. And he was in the 1st Cav Division and the 62nd and 63rd Combat Tracker team. It's a platoon size. So there's a book and there's a website. The website's full of pictures with little comments on the pictures. And
well, it's good to know because people, this one of the functions of this YouTube that we do is to educate people. They just learned something today, you know what I mean?
Hope so.
But we got to go. You know,
too.
I'm glad we're here. You know, at the convention, I'm trying to get more and more Vietnam veterans on my show. So if you're out there and you're in Florida, near Leesburg somewhere, give me a call, and let's do some more shows like this, and I could learn more from guys like you.
Willing to tell you.
Yeah. Welcome home, brother.
Thank you.
And this is how we say goodbye. I didn't tell you this part. You ready? You ready to salute when I tell you? Ready? Follow my lead. To all our veterans out there, active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time, that's how we end the show.
Excellent.